In this coding module, we would like to work with React and data. We're going to be signing up to CoinMarketCap. This is a dashboard for cryptocurrencies. This is the real data that we would like to connect to. So you can see here, this is data per cryptocurrency, stock prices, 24 market cap, all these different things. There's an enormous amount of data here that this service will provide to us. We're not going to use all the data. It's going to be what is used in our dashboard, those things we've already configured. So you need to go ahead and you can use Gmail to get set up. We need to verify in our email that we have logged in. Once we are logged in, we would like to get access to the developer dashboard. In the developer dashboard, of course, there's a paid subscription plan, but we're going to use the free account. What we're after is we're after the API key. Go to Crypto API. This is the API that this CoinMarketCap, so you can see here in the quick start guide, you can see that we can use the API key that they configure to call their data set so that we can get real-time data into our application. Currently, right now, we have a static app. We would like to have real data. So if you go through the documentation, you can see there's a bunch of different endpoints via RESTful endpoints we could take advantage of. And what's really great about documentation like this is if you kind of navigate through, you can see some of the payloads coming back. So first of all, we want to go back to our crypto dashboard. One developer note is, I'm going to show you how to connect with real-time data. If for any reason this is not working for you, you could still leverage the CryptoCoin static array if you're running into problems with the API key or with cores. Because what's going to happen is eventually this is going to live on the back end. But for right now, the backend server. For right now, we're going to do front end and connecting through front end. So we're going to save the API key, and we're going to need to use this API key within our component to go and fetch the data from this external site. We're going to need to use some things that a functional component does not have, lifecycle hooks, in fact. In class components, they have component mounts when it unmounts. We can use a hook for this. Then number two, we need to get the data. So we can use Fetch API to do that. And then number three, we need to get the data from CoinMarketCap API, and we need to set the real data into our component state. And then we need to handle loading and errors. This is what we would like to do. So we need to add another hook, add a hook called useEffect. So useEffect will give us some life cycle to our component, such as when the component has first mounted or loaded up and when it has unloaded. And so we're going to capture when this component mounts. And this is the perfect time to make a web service call. So we want to make sure that the component is mounted and rendered. And we would like this to only fire our fetch one time. So a little tiny detail, but very important, is if you give the useEffect an empty array, so you can have an implementation here. It can be a function like console log loading, but the dependency array list needs to be empty. And the reason why that is we lets the hook know that we would only like to fire this effect one time. Now, the dependency array could be other variables to track, and then it will basically fire an effect anytime that variable changes. But we would just like to have mounting called once, which is not a bad thing. It's just kind of how React is kind of rendering a little bit on the refresh. But we know it's not firing multiple times. So you can see there's a little bit of a post back, perhaps. Maybe there's an error and it triggers it. But for the most part, we know this is going to fire one time. So we have some errors in here in our JSX that we need to address. And this comes back to a very important attribute on JSX. We cannot use the class keyword. It needs to be class name. So you can see here back in our crypto card component, we had used class, which is a reserved keyword in JavaScript, class name, camel cased. So then we clear up one error here, and then there's another error about unique keys. Now I know what that is. That is around the mapping. But it's a warning that the console is giving us. So it's good to pay attention to those, but it's not affecting the render. So let's get back to this. So we have a component life cycle hook called useEffect. This is where we would like to fetch this external data. So that we can create a fetch function, functional expression. We can fetch the data and we can see that the data is being fetched. So we're calling this fetch data directly. We can see that within our useEffect, it's firing once, which is great. So here is where we can use the Fetch API. Now, the Fetch API is built into your browser, so you don't need to download this. This is part of your Chrome browser and part of the web API that's built into it. There are other packages that could be used for this type of mechanism. But for now, what we're going to do is we are going to grab the URL. So this is going to be the CoinMarketCap URL. And this is the RESTful endpoints that we're going to be calling into. So for right now, we can put a placeholder here. But eventually, we're going to make that call directly to that website, open that channel of communication, and hopefully get some real data back. So we can see here, we're just saying fetch async. So async await, again, that is part of ES6+. It's basically a way of being more asynchronous. So we can await on this data to be fetched. And if there's a problem with the data or it's taking a little bit longer, we don't want to block the current thread. We would like our interface to continue to load up while the data is asynchronously loading in. So we're just setting this up so that data can be set into our variable. And then ideally, we are going to take this data and we're going to set it into state. We need to actually get the JSON data out of it, because how the two-step process with Fetch API, where it gets the data and we need to unpack it with the .json root. So let's see here. We kind of see how it's all wired up here a little bit. We're not making any real calls yet, but we have the plumbing in place. So we need to go back to this documentation for CoinMarketCap, and we need to find some an API endpoint might want to use. So we can see here there's endpoints for cryptocurrency, blockchain, fiat, some info, and you can see here on the right-hand side, you can get a look at that JSON, JavaScript object notation. It's in JavaScript format. It's a JSON object. Most RESTful APIs will return back a JSON object. So you can see here how it looks. This is cryptocurrency/info. We can see here we have access to the image as well, which is great. This kind of looks like what we need, perhaps, but we can also keep looking into the latest API. So we can see version 1 cryptocurrency/listing is latest. So the latest, a list of all active cryptocurrencies with their latest market data. That's what the documentation says. So this looks like a very good endpoint we could use. Now they're giving us the endpoint. They are giving us the entire endpoint, coinmarketcap.com/version 1/cryptocurrency/latest. So this is a real endpoint now that we can fetch against. Now, we're going to do this, and it's probably going to give us an error because we're not going to be authenticated. We're not including the API key. It's going to request that API key is coming along for the request, but we can set up a try catch. What a try catch does is if there's anything internal cause an error in our request, we can capture this error in our catch. So our coin data is in state. That was our static list. We're going to create a simple flag, is loading, and set is loading. So this is going to be a true false. Perhaps we can track the fact that the data is loading. So we're going to have a false flag here. And when the data is loading, we'll set it to true. We're going to also have an error. So we're going to have a state flag for whether or not there is an error message. So we can play around with this now. We'll set it to true and see what happens. Here we can add a little bit of code here to say that if the flag is loading, return back a simple message. There's a little fragment to say the page is loading. Now, because we're running this locally, this may not take very long. Well, for now, we're actually triggering true. We're setting it to true so we can see it. But when the data truly is all wired up, we may not see the is loading very long. But for local development, it's a good idea to have this just to let the user know or let yourself know that there is some data processing going on. So maybe we'll clean this up and wrap into a div, and we can add styles to it later on. Just knowing that it's in place is good. And perhaps we can do a little bit of inline styling here just to center the message. And remember, this is one of the ways in React to style. We can do inline as well. Classes are better, but sometimes we can be very direct. We can also check if there is an error, and then we can display the error message as well. So we'll create a little fragment for the error message, and in the same way, most likely we're going to style with some inline styling. So here in our try catch, this is where we would like to capture the error. This is the part where if there is an error coming back from the server, we can actually mention that there is an error loading data. And when that is set, if there is an error and the try catch catches it, then we can actually let the user know that there has been an error, and we can handle it in the catch. Finally block fires after the try and the catch has executed. So this is what happens after all of this execution happens. After it's all done, finally we set the is loading to false. So we have a nice little orchestration here. We load the component up, it mounts, it fetches data, we track that the data is loading, and then we set the flag to false. So for right now, we can see we're having an issue here. So we're having a little issue in our network tab. This is related to CORS issue, cross-site origin issue, because we are making, the browser is actually giving us a security violation here because we are trying to make a fetch through our browser client side to an external site. So the browser doesn't necessarily know if this is malicious or not. So we can actually check on the fetch if the response is okay. And if the response is okay or not okay in this case, then we can throw an exception. So this is part of our own handling here. If there has been a problem with the network, we're actually going to throw a new error and we're going to catch that error. So this is actually in response to the network error that may come through. So now we have a little bit of objects are not valid as a React child found object error. You meant to render a collection of child instead of using an array. So right here, we're going to grab the error message. So part of the requirement from CoinMarketCap API is that we can pass in some options. So if we want to interact with this URL, it's going to require another option for headers. This is just part of the communication aspect of it. And in this header, some parameters, we're going to have to include at some point the actual API key, because CoinMarketCap will reject any request that does not have a proper key. So you can see in the documentation here, this is fairly common, by the way, that you need to include the key in the header if you're working with some type of interface. You may even create your own one day where you give an API key for paid subscribers, and only then can they communicate with your backend if they have a key. So this is pretty standard. So this is where we plug in our variable, which is the key that we got from the developer dashboard if you logged in. So we may need to put this in single quotes, key value pair. Remember, it's still an object at the end of the day. So at least we don't have an error here. So let's take a look at the network tab. So the network tab is actually working. We are getting data back, and we are fetching it from the CoinMarketCap API. So this is actually working pretty well. Now, one thing I might note here, a developer note, is you may need to get a certain plugin to make this work. If you're running into a CORS issue, there's a Chrome extension that you can get that you can allow CORS and bypass the error. So just keep that in mind, that because we're working on the front end, the browser may throw some security issues, and we're going to bypass that with that particular plugin. So here we're going to get rid of that static list that we had, crypto coins. We're going to set the static list to the empty array, so we have no data. And what we would like to do is we would like to set the data that's coming back from the crypto coin market cap. That data, that is what we're going to render, and that's going to be the real data. We need to see the data that's coming back, so we're going to output the coin data here. And then we're going to take a look at the actual data coming back. We may need to unpack it a little bit differently here, but I'm just going to dump this to the console here. Optionally, you don't need to do this, but you can, just to take a look at the data coming back. We can wrap this in a JSON.stringify, take the JSON object and wrap in a string. We can see all the data here coming back. So we know it is there. It's just we might need to unpack it a little bit, because you can see it may be an object, the key value pair itself. I'm going to copy this payload and I'm going to paste it inside our formatter. You don't need to do this step. This is kind of optional here. I've placed our data, our JSON payload in this JSON formatter. This just allows us to give us a little bit of a view of the payload coming back. You can see it has two keys, status and data. We are after the data. So we may need to just access that data key a little bit differently because now we're working with a real payload and real data. The keys look similar to what we had coded with the underscores, but we may need to change that as well. Data.data, and then you can see the data is coming through now. So we have access to the values, but some of our cards are broken, which is expected because we didn't get the keys properly. All the keys may be a little bit different. So it's encouraging here. We have the data. We need to go back into our crypto card, and we need to output the props, the data that has been passed in. Now this is the real card data we're going to be looking at. So we can console log this. Again, this step is optional. I'm just showing you that you can stringify the whole props coming in and take a look at it. And we can get a look at the formatting. So let's go to the DevTools here. And we can see here's the actual card data here. So this is what the object looks like. And we can see some of the key value pairs are underscores. So we're going to have to adjust our keys here. So our props is not going to be market cap, volume, and change. It may be slightly different, lowercase with underscores. So we need to match this up with the data that's actually being passed in now. So you can see we did name. Name is coming through. So you can see the coin.quote. We need to use a dot notation. Coin.quote.usd. Market cap. This all matches up to the actual real data that's coming back. Once we clean this up a bit, I imagine this is going to be rendering properly. We needed to change this to props.quote. So now we can see the data is rendering properly. Next up, we just need to fix the image URL. So next up, we need to go back to the documentation because we would like to see the name of the actual image, the image URL. We can look back to the docs and we can see in here accessing this logo URL in the right way so that we may render it into our crypto card. So back in our component here, we just need to kind of change this image source in a little bit of a different way. Relative path will be, we can see source now is the coin market cap. We're using a little bit of the template literals to pass in the coin ID and the coin name. So that's all we need is we need just to change it. We're not going to have the full path. The way that string works is we pass in the ID, which is available to us through the props ID. And then you can see there that we are actually calling the image URL correctly now. So we have all the data coming from CoinMarketCap. This is live data and it's not static. And this is a really good step.